Now don't worry, this isn't going to be another marathon, but I think it's time to go back to a series that I haven't talked about in quite a while, Castlevania. We've already covered the NES trilogy in Super Castlevania 4, so let's just go straight into the next game in the series, Castlevania Dracula X for the Super Nintendo. As you guys know, Super Castlevania 4 set a lot of standards for the franchise, and to this day is considered to be one of the best Super Nintendo titles ever released. The control in that game was absolutely perfect. Granted, some of the gameplay did have issues, but overall it was a tremendous experience and there was nothing else like it. It made a lot of people curious as to how Dracula X was going to follow to something as popular as Super Castlevania 4, and it would have to fill a bunch of shoes. Dracula X lets us take control of a new Belmont named Richter, who happens to be a descendant of Simon Belmont. Like pretty much every other Belmont in the clan, he needs to destroy Dracula, but Richter has other reasons to kill him aside from preventing Armageddon. Dracula has also kidnapped Richter's girlfriend Annette, as well as her younger sister Maria. Saving Annette and Maria are optional, however, but more on that later. Now before I get into the gameplay, it should be noted that Dracula X is an altered port of another Castlevania game called Rondo of Blood. It was originally made for the TurboGrafx 16, but until it was re-released for the Wii Virtual Console and as an unlockable in Dracula X Chronicles for the PSP, people outside of Japan didn't get to play this game, so instead, we got Dracula X. Or Vampire's Kiss as it's known in Europe and Australia. Ooh, does that mean Dracula's gonna try and be kinky in this game? The game itself plays like your average Castlevania game, where all you need to do is get from point A to point B in a linear side-scrolling fashion and defeat the boss at the end. The graphics are definitely more lively and colorful than they were in Super Castlevania 4. Seriously, this is a very pretty game to look at. Unfortunately, if there's one thing the Belmonts never taught Richter, it was how to properly use a whip. We're back to the NES controls, guys, so that means we can't whip in all directions and we can no longer control our jumps. Well, kind of. You're not exactly able to change Richter's direction in midair entirely, but you are able to stop him from going farther than necessary. Richter can also do a backflip, which isn't the most useful moveset to have, but when it's needed, it's a guaranteed lifesaver. While he may not be able to whip in all directions, Richter still has one of my favorite abilities in the entire series, the item crash. Whatever sub-weapon you have in your arsenal, pressing the X button will allow him to perform like a super sub-weapon move, which can sometimes really help on the bosses. I also tend to use it if I need brief invincibility. Richter also doesn't need to obtain the double or triple shot in order to use 2 or 3 sub-weapons at a time. You have that ability from the get-go and it's a very nice addition to the series. Like Simon, Richter is also able to jump on the stairs, but expanding upon that, he can now jump off the stairs at his own free will. This is awesome, as it really helps getting through annoying enemy placements. You also no longer have to constantly whip candles for upgrades, as Richter already has the best whip you can get, and you don't have to worry about losing your preferred sub-weapon in case you accidentally picked another one up. Overall, the new stuff added to Richter is pretty cool, but I sure do miss some of the abilities his ancestor had. One thing I really don't understand, however, is why using the sub-weapon has been once again laid out to pressing both up and the attack button. In Super Castlevania 4, all he needed to do was press the R button, so why didn't Konami also do that for Dracula X? On a TurboGrafx 16, this makes sense because the controller only had 2 buttons, much like the NES controller. But this is a Super Nintendo game, you've got like 4 face buttons and 2 triggers to work with here. Did they not see the amount of buttons on this thing? Was there a port issue, or could they just really not be bothered to change the button layout? The music, however, is still fantastic. We get some new tunes here and there as well as some familiar ones. You got your Vampire Killer, your Bloody Tears, your Beginning, it's all here. It's a good thing too, because it's probably the only way to keep your sanity while playing this game. Yes, like the other games, Dracula X is extremely difficult, but by this point I think it's to be expected. Hell, you might even struggle on the first level. In my opinion, it's without a doubt one of the hardest in the series. This is especially when it comes to the bosses. 1 or 2 of them may not be that bad, but don't be surprised if you die a lot to a majority of them. My least favorite boss is the Sorcerer in the Catacombs. He has 2 forms and is able to slow you down as well as throw a bunch of gravestones at you, which are really hard to dodge. The last thing to mention is that there are a couple of alternate levels you can take, and if you search hard enough, you're able to rescue both Annette and Maria. It's totally optional, but if you want to get the best ending, you're required to save both of them. You'll also be able to fight Death again at the top of the clock tower instead of this dude. The length of the game is also a bit shorter than Castlevania 4. Where that game had about 11 levels to play, Dracula X now only has about 7 to travel through, excluding the alternate stages. I don't mind this too much though, especially considering that this is much harder than Castlevania 4. At the end of the level, we'll once again come across Dracula himself. This is undoubtedly the most infamous fight against him in the entire series, because not only is it difficult to hit his head and dodge some of his projectiles, you have to do all this while jumping on platforms. And despite Richter not learning how to use the whip, he still managed to learn the Belmont knockback, which when trying to battle the head of the vampires across platforms, does not help in the slightest. And just like Castlevania 3, if you get a game over to Dracula, you have to go through the entire level all over again. Thankfully though, you start the hallway before him if you lose a life, and the level itself isn't quite as long, so it shouldn't be too much of a hassle. Like Castlevania 1, Dracula also has a second form in the shape of, oh my god, he is trying to be kinky! That's very disturbing! So yes, in addition to hitting Dracula's head, dodging his attacks, and hopping across platforms, you also had to fight two forms. Here's a tip: before entering the fight, make sure you collect the axe from one of the candles. Then stand here at the lower platform in the middle of the room. This way you'll be able to use the axe on Dracula when he teleports on either side. Before you make the killing blow, make sure he stands on either of these two platforms. That way you should be able to wail on Dracula's second form for a bit. If you think you're going to get hit by either of these two forms, then just duck down and Richter shouldn't flinch back. In no time at all, Dracula will dissolve into nothing and finally end the game. The ending is pretty lame though. No matter which ending you get, you don't even get to see the castle crumble like in the other games, and just like Castlevania 4, the sun coincidentally rises, incinerating Dracula. Afterwards, the credits start rolling with whatever ending you got, which only consists of a screenshot. Despite the lousy ending, however, Dracula X is still a pretty decent game. It's by no means the best Castlevania game out there, but I would imagine that even if it did follow Super Castlevania 4's footsteps, it probably still wouldn't be as recognized as that game. Some people may not like the idea that this is an altered port of Rondo of Blood and the harder difficulty might turn off a few players, but as a game itself it's still worth having in your SNES collection. With that said, I'll give Dracula X an 8 out of 10, standing for satisfying yet frustrating. Oh come on, you still have to use a password feature on a Super Nintendo game? When was this released? 1995, so save features have been around for almost every single Super Nintendo game made. I think we still have a bit of time to kick Dracula's butt in another game, so let's move on to the only Castlevania game released for the Sega Genesis, Castlevania Bloodlines. Up until after the release of Super Castlevania 4, games of the series would only be present on Nintendo consoles, which meant that if you owned a Genesis, you pretty much bit the dust. That was until 3 years later when Castlevania Bloodlines came out and Genesis players could finally see what all the fuss was about. The plot once again is pretty simple. It follows a woman named Elizabeth Bartley who happens to be Dracula's niece, and she wishes to resurrect her dear uncle. Actually, this character is based on a Hungarian countess who goes by the same name and is known for being a deranged serial killer and covering herself in the blood of virgins, giving her one of the nicknames of Countess Dracula. Bloodlines lets us play as two new characters, John Morris and Eric Lecard. Or is it Lecarde? Whatever. Apparently we don't get any explanation as to where the Belmonts are until Castlevania Portrait of Ruin, which I've never played, so I'm just as curious as you guys are. Unlike Castlevania 3 where you were able to switch characters in the middle of a level, you have to choose either John or Eric before the game begins. This probably won't appeal to people who like changing between characters in Castlevania 3, but I personally don't mind this approach. Let's take a look at John first. Well, it seems that he's been trusted with a Belmont whip, but like Richter, he hasn't learned Simon's skills. Well, he can at least whip down and upwards diagonally while in midair, and can even swing on any given surface, so that's something. He can also jump on and off stairs like Richter can, which once again proves very useful. Eric doesn't use a whip, but rather the Alucard spear. Yes, the same Alucard who's Dracula's son. I personally have a much easier time playing as Eric. I love this guy. Not only can he use his spear upwards, making some of the bosses absolutely no problem if you know how to abuse it, but he can use it diagonally while on the ground and can even do a super jump after holding down for a very short time. You sadly can't use the spear upwards and downwards diagonally while in midair, but that would have made him a more preferred character over John. He also has a spin attack, but I've never managed to figure out a way to pull it off, and it doesn't look or sound too useful anyway. Like John, Eric also has better control for the stairs, but neither of these characters can still change their direction while jumping. The sub-weapon has thankfully been given its own button again just by pressing C, and it can even use more enhanced versions that perform different effects at the cost of more ammunition. Speaking of which, for some strange reason the hearts have been replaced by gems. Odd. This is also the only Castlevania game to have a fourth weapon upgrade, making it stronger than before. You lose it, however, if you get hit, and it's unfortunately a concept we'll be seeing in the Game Boy games. What's cool though is that if you fiddle around with the sound test in a certain way and get the fourth upgrade, you'll be able to listen to the trio of familiar Castlevania tunes to make the journey feel more exciting. Though while I've never been particularly fond of Sega music, I gotta say I quite like this game's soundtrack. I don't like it as much as other Castlevania soundtracks, but for a Genesis game, it's not half bad. There's even a classic tune from Super Castlevania 4 on the Stairway to Dracula. The sound effects are incredibly Genesis, and by that I mean they sound weird and unnatural. The graphics though are absolutely gorgeous for a 16-bit game, and it's definitely not afraid to make the game gory. You've got zombies with half their bodies missing, a rotting hellhound, harpies who lose their heads, and a fountain of blood.
Because kids love gore. I know I did. God, I was a strange child.
There are only 6 stages, like in the original Castlevania, but these are among some of the longest levels the series has come to have so far. Each of them have a mini-boss to fight in the middle and end with a major boss. We have a few recurring bosses, such as Frankenstein's monster, the giant bat, who for some reason is called the Gargoyle, and of course Death himself, who's definitely gotten a lot easier since Super Castlevania 4. As well as them, we have some new bosses to fight. There's one that's made of nothing but gears, giant knights, evil faces, and a woman who turns into Mothra. Alright, it's not really Mothra, but it looks a hell of a lot like her, doesn't it? What really sucks in this game, however, is that this is the only Castlevania to have limited continues. 2 of them to be exact. It doesn't matter how far you go, if you run out of continues, you'll have to start the whole game all over again. There is a password feature, which is not only a pain in the ass to input, but it also doesn't reset the number of continues, which leads to a problem I had with the final stage. At this point, I only had 1 life and no continues. There is an extra life in my most hated section in the entire game where your vision is distorted, but not only do you have to go through this level in 1 clean slate, you also have to fight not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, but 6 boss fights. And that's not including Dracula's other 2 forms. Jesus, tap dancing, Christ, are you mad, Konami? Well, to be fair, the first few bosses are Death's versions of the first few bosses we fought at the earlier stages in the game, which if you know what you're doing, you shouldn't be too difficult, and as I've mentioned before, Death himself isn't too difficult. One of his cards even drops a bunch of food you can use to restore your health. After Death, we can confront Elizabeth and stop her from resurrecting Dracula. Her Medusa form is incredibly easy if you just keep ducking down and mashing the attack button, and her second form is even easier. All you really need to do is watch where she's teleporting and attack her a few times while crouching from her projectiles. It takes forever though, so be prepared to spend a bit of time. Despite defeating Elizabeth and as seen earlier, Dracula makes a return anyway, and like Castlevania 3, he has 3 forms, which 2 of them are just weird. The second form is him as a wizard, which with the longer spear upgrade makes him an absolute joke, and the third form is him as a demon with a mouth for a crotch that pees fire. Dude, that's gotta be uncomfortable. When Dracula is defeated, he turns into a skeleton and then eventually turns into dust, ending Castlevania Bloodlines. Dracula's castle collapses, you get a short message about your character fulfilling his duties, and oh, that's it? Oh, it's one of those games where you have to beat it on the hardest difficulty in order to get the best ending.
Well, that.
The castle doesn't even crumble all the way if you beat the game on the easy difficulty. Damn, that's harsh. I really do want to know what the best ending is like, but the game's already hard enough as it is. It's definitely not as hard as Dracula X, but there are a few moments that are just really, really annoying. Yes, I'm looking at you, final stage. The limited number of continues also puts me under a lot of pressure, and that's the last thing I want to be feeling in a video game. I will say that thanks to the music, the game is a bit more lively than Super Castlevania 4, though I still very much love that game's atmosphere. Bloodlines has also never been re-released outside of the Genesis, so if you want to get the game, you're going to have to get yourself a Genesis in order to play it. But even then, I would prefer Super Castlevania 4 just because of the much better control and unlimited continues. I'll give Castlevania Bloodlines a 7.5 out of 10, standing for colorful but still a step backwards. This is a great game to have on the Genesis though, and should definitely be in any Castlevania fan's collection.
So I'm not going to be going through any more Castlevania games anytime soon, but when that day comes, the next one we're going to look at is the most highly anticipated in the series, along with Super Castlevania 4, Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the PlayStation. Oh boy, I'm going to enjoy making fun of that game. My name's Josh Smith, I praise the treasure and I pick apart the trash. See you guys next time.